The help needs to wait its turn, Cabo. I don't care if General Vance himself is waiting for his floor to be buffed. I deal with actual critical supply chain issues first. Look around. Do you see a sign that says non-essential janitorial priority? No, you don't. Now step back. You're dripping mop water on my boots. Sergeant Brennan, Supply NCOIC for Sector 7, didn't even bother to look up from the complex digital inventory sheet displayed on his dual monitor setup. His uniform was starched beyond reason, the creases sharp enough to cut paper, a perfect, pristine contrast to the sweat-stained olive-drab utility uniform worn by Cabo Volkov. Volkov stood silently by the counter, holding a standard-issue gray utility mop and a nearly empty bucket of industrial cleaner that smelled faintly of ammonia and exhaustion. Her request had been simple: floor wax suitable for the polished marble floor of the command center, an area Brennan rarely saw, but whose occupants he served implicitly. "Sergeant," Volkov stated, her voice quiet, almost raspy from disuse. "The CO's inspection is scheduled for 0800. The floor finish is degraded in the briefing room, and the chemical inventory shows we have zero remaining stock of the polymer sealant. Can I please get the requisition signed for the Level 3 access supply cage?" Brennan finally sighed, a dramatic, performative exhalation that suggested Volkov had personally insulted his lineage. He pushed his chair back, the industrial casters squealing slightly against the composite floor. "Requisition 34 Beta Charlie," Brennan sneered, picking up the official paperwork Volkov had submitted 20 minutes prior, holding it between two fingers as if it were contaminated waste. "For floor sealant. Do you know how many actual warfighters need actual battlefield supplies right now? How many specialized optics or trauma kits are held up while I deal with your administrative nonsense? You're asking for priority on floor shine, Cabo. Priority. Get real." He tossed the form back onto the counter. It drifted down slowly, hitting the laminate surface with a soft, defeated sound. "You need to understand your role here, Volkov," Brennan continued, leaning over the counter, dropping his voice just low enough to sound confidential, but loud enough to ensure the two junior supply clerks sorting tactical vests nearby could hear him clearly. "You're maintenance. You're non-essential. You clean up the mess made by the people who actually contribute to the mission. You wait. Or maybe," he added, his lip curling into a mocking smile, "you can use water and elbow grease like the rest of the cleaning staff. You people are always looking for the easy way out." Volkov's jaw tightened, a small, barely perceptible muscular shift beneath the grime and dust that seemed permanently affixed to her face. She looked down at the mop handle, her knuckles white where they gripped the cheap aluminum. The insult wasn't just about the supplies, it was about the categorization, the deliberate, dismissive placement of her service into the bin marked unimportant. Non-essential. The word echoed in the deep, muffled recesses of her mind, catching against the scar tissue and the lingering ache behind her eyes. Non-essential. The bright, buzzing fluorescent lights of the supply room suddenly seemed too sharp, the air conditioning too cold, the general noise level, the distant roar of a transport lifting off the adjacent runway, the chatter of the supply clerks, becoming overwhelming, abrasive. This sensory overload, this immediate jarring irritability, was a familiar companion. It always announced the arrival of the memory, the inevitable flood of sound and heat and dust. Volkov closed her eyes for a split second, seeking the cool darkness, but the image was already there, imprinted behind her eyelids like a residual burn from a muzzle flash. The ochre dust of Afghanistan, 2018. She wasn't Cabo Volkov, the maintenance worker then. She was Specialist Volkov, 21 years old, designated marksman attached to a high-value perimeter security detail operating out of the ragged, perpetually under-defended forward operating base Chapman. She wasn't carrying a mop. She was carrying the M107A1, the Barrett. It weighed 33 pounds unloaded, a savage precision instrument designed not just for distance, but for kinetic energy delivery. It was the weapon that demanded perfect stillness, absolute calculation, and a cold, unforgiving relationship with the laws of physics. The mission on that Tuesday had been routine: convoy escort through the Chark Valley, a stretch of road notorious for deep valleys that amplified echoes and provided exceptional concealment for entrenched enemy fire teams. Volkov was positioned on the crest of a ridge, a kilometer and a half from the main column, the wind whipping sand across her scope lens. She remembered the calculations vividly. The density altitude, the air temperature and humidity adjusting the ballistic coefficient, required a 4-click adjustment low. The Coriolis effect,
The rotational spin of the Earth dictating the subtle lateral drift of the 661-grain projectile over that distance demanded 3/4 of a click right. Her range card, written in near-illegible military shorthand on a laminated sheet, was tucked into her breast pocket. The elevation was 7,800 feet. The target acquisition window, less than 5 seconds. The IED hit the second striker first. Not a massive blast, but enough kinetic force to shear the rear axle and stall the vehicle sideways, blocking the narrow track. That was the signal. From 3 different directions, high ground, low ground, and a small cluster of fortified cinderblock huts, the return fire opened up. It wasn't the ragged, sporadic fire of amateurs. It was a sustained, concentrated torrent of 7.62 by 54 MAR rounds from PKMs, mixed with the higher-pitched snap of AKM fire. Volkov instinctively settled into the recoil shoulder cup of the Barrett, her cheek welded to the cold metal of the stock. She didn't track the striker, she tracked the muzzle flashes, those bright, orange-red signatures of combustion that betrayed the shooter's position. The first target was the machine gunner positioned near the huts, delivering devastating suppression fire onto the now immobilized convoy medic team trying to extract the casualties from the damaged striker. Volkov took a deep, controlled breath, the tactical pause, let half of it out, and held the rest steady in her diaphragm. Range, 1,510 meters. Wind, 6 miles per hour, 9 o'clock. The round left the barrel, a deep, resounding thump that seemed to rattle her teeth, the recoil buffering into her shoulder plate. The spotter, Private First Class Morales, called the trace trajectory immediately. Impact confirmed, target down. But there were 3 more PKM positions and at least 7 individual riflemen focusing their fire on the 3 wounded men trapped outside the lead convoy vehicle. The sound was deafening, amplified by the valley walls, turning the air into a physical, vibrating presence. The stench of burning diesel mixed with the metallic, sharp odor of spent powder. Volkov was running the bolt furiously, the heavy steel mechanism sliding back, ejecting the enormous casing, chambering the next round. 1 shot, 1 kill was the mantra, but today required rapid-fire precision. The second shot, a high-flash position, elevated, raining fire down. Crack, flump, target gone. The third shot was the hardest. A shooter partially obscured by the ruins of a stone wall, a difficult angle requiring a holdover adjustment to account for the obstruction. As she lined up the shot, a secondary mortar round landed 50 meters from her position, sending shrapnel whistling high overhead. It wasn't the shrapnel that hit her, but the concussive force. It felt like a giant, invisible hammer slamming into the side of her head. The world instantly dimmed, replacing the clarity of the scope with a chaotic swirl of light and noise. A searing pain erupted behind her left eye, and she tasted blood in her mouth, having bitten down violently on her tongue. Volkov didn't stop. She couldn't. Through the blinding headache, the nausea, and the sudden difficulty in focusing her vision, she adjusted her aim. Using pure muscle memory honed over countless hours in the blistering heat of the range, she fired the 4th shot. It hit the corner of the wall, showering the target with stone fragments and forcing him to expose himself momentarily. Volkov immediately ran the bolt and fired the 5th round. Target down. They're pulling back 2 of the wounded, Morales yelled, his voice strained with urgency. It was during the reload for the 6th shot that the Barrett failed. The heavy bolt seized, a catastrophic failure due to heat expansion and fine grit ingestion. She wrestled with it for 3 agonizing seconds, her breath coming in ragged gasps, the pain in her head escalating to a screaming agony. Guns down, she yelled into the radio. Manual override failure. The immediate silence on her end was terrifying. The machine gun fire from the enemy had not ceased. The wounded men were still exposed. Volkov didn't waste time trying to clear the massive rifle. She dropped the Barrett, grabbing her secondary, the standard issue service rifle, the Heckler & Koch HK416, chambered in 5.56 by 45 MAR NATO. A fast, reliable, lightweight rifle, a different tool entirely. She transitioned from long-range precision to short-range suppression in an instant, abandoning the cover she had used for the Barrett. She sprinted 50 meters across the ridge, exposing herself entirely, forcing the enemy to shift their focus. Her role was no longer designated marksman. It was distraction and cover fire. The HK416 felt light, almost insignificant compared to the Barrett. She dropped into a prone position behind a shallow rock outcropping, her TBI throbbing mercilessly, and began laying down concentrated, aimed bursts into the known enemy positions, forcing their heads down.
She didn't aim for kills anymore. She aimed for suppression, buying time. The engagement lasted 18 more minutes. 18 minutes where Volkov, concussed, bleeding from a superficial shrapnel wound in her arm, and operating with a searing headache that made every movement an act of willpower, maintained unbroken fire discipline. She chewed through 8 30-round magazines, keeping the perimeter secured while the remaining 4 wounded soldiers, 2 medics and 2 infantrymen, were successfully pulled back to the safety of the armored vehicles. When the quick reaction force finally arrived and the fighting subsided, Volkov lay prone, not moving. the HK-416 resting hot in the dust. Her vision swam, the high-altitude sun pounding through her skull. She wasn't just exhausted, she was broken. She was evacuated 3 hours later, diagnosed with a severe concussion, multiple embedded shrapnel pieces removed later, and a permanent high-frequency hearing loss in her left ear, a result of having fired the Barrett without proper dual protection ear pro when the initial mortar shockwave hit. The citations came slowly. The formal review panel took nearly a year to dissect every detail of the contact, interviewing the survivors, cross-referencing GPS data with ballistic reports. The conclusion was unanimous. Volkov's rapid and sustained suppression fire, immediately following a traumatic brain injury, was the singular reason 4 lives were saved. It was defined as an act of uncommon valor, beyond the call of duty, performed under extreme physical duress. The awards were presented quietly, away from the media spotlight, due to the sensitive nature of the F.O. Chapman operations at the time. The Medal of Valor, 3 Purple Hearts for the shrapnel, the TBI, and a later minor incident, and the Commendation for Heroism. But the brain injury remained. The headaches, the hypersensitivity, the difficulty managing large-scale command stress. Volkov, unable or unwilling to return to frontline combat duty, but too proud to take a full medical discharge, requested transfer to a non-combat, non-administrative role where volume and noise were minimal. Maintenance. Janitorial. A place where the daily mission was clear, clean, and silent. She chose to wear the dull gray maintenance utility uniform, not the crisp camouflage of operational forces, preferring anonymity to the scrutiny and endless questions that came with wearing her rank and medals visibly. She accepted the silence, the humility, and the grueling physical work as a form of self-imposed penance, a way to keep the adrenaline and the trauma at bay. She took the job of the quiet Cabo Volkov who polished boots and mopped floors. The memory, hot and sharp, faded as quickly as it had arrived, leaving behind the familiar, dull throb behind her eyes. Volkov blinked, focusing on the pristine, self-satisfied face of Sergeant Brennan across the counter. "Elbow grease, Sergeant," Volkov repeated, her voice steady now, devoid of the earlier request. "I understand. I'll make do." She turned to leave, the mop handle scraping against the floor. But Brennan wasn't finished. The silence of the supply clerks watching Volkov's humiliation was emboldening him. "Hold on, Cabo," Brennan called out, his tone shifting from dismissive bureaucrat to petty tyrant. "You know, the general mentioned that the brass on his office door looked a little dull yesterday. While you're out there making do with the floor, maybe you can also learn to use some of that elbow grease on the finer details. You people always forget that presentation matters here. We're soldiers, not—" He paused, looking her up and down, sizing up her stained uniform and tired demeanor. "Not civilian contractors just punching a clock. We uphold standards. Try to remember that your job, however trivial, reflects on the entire command structure. Now get out of here before you track more dirt into my clean supply room." Brennan gestured dismissively toward the exit. Volkov felt the cold clarity of pure, unadulterated contempt wash over her. It was the moment she understood that Brennan truly saw her not as a fellow soldier who had served differently, but as a lower form of life, the hired help, disposable and unworthy of basic respect. She took one deep breath, preparing to simply nod and walk away, to swallow the insult as she had swallowed so much pain and dirt over the years. But before she could move, a new presence entered the supply depot. It wasn't announced by clattering or shouting, but by a sudden, profound drop in the ambient noise level. The supply clerks instantly stiffened, their casual chatter ceasing mid-sentence. Commander Elias Thorne walked in. Thorne was not built like a standard officer. He was deceptively compact, moving with an impossible economy of motion, his subdued multicam fatigues perfectly conforming to his frame. His eyes, though focused on nothing specific, seemed to miss nothing. He wore no rank insignia visibly, only the faint,
nearly invisible stitching on his shoulder where the trident pin of Naval Special Warfare was located, a sign of absolute Tier 1 authority. Thorne didn't look at Brennan or the supply clerks. His attention was fixed entirely on Cabo Volkov, who stood motionless, gripping the mop handle. Brennan, catching sight of the commander, whom everyone knew carried extreme pull with HQ and was known for his icy professional detachment, snapped immediately to attention, his posture radiating eagerness. "Commander Thorne, sir, Welcome to Supply Sector 7. Anything I can get for you? Specialized optics, Class 9 explosives. We just got a fresh shipment of... Thorne held up a single gloved hand, cutting Brennan off mid-sentence. The silence returned, heavy and absolute. Thorne walked past Brennan, ignoring his salute, and stopped directly in front of Volkov's cleaning cart. It was a standard gray plastic utility trolley, filled with industrial brushes, spray bottles, and rags. Tucked into the back corner, wrapped in a perfectly clean folded cloth, was a set of custom, highly polished black leather general's boots. They were ready for delivery to General Vance. Thorne knelt down slowly, his movement deliberate, his gaze fixed on the cart. He didn't look at the boots. He looked inside the bucket. Volkov had a habit. After every shift, she would soak her most prized possession, the small, tarnished but meticulously preserved bronze object, in a solution of baking soda and water to clean off the dust and fingerprints it invariably collected. She had learned to keep it hidden, wrapped or submerged to avoid attention. Thorne reached into the murky water of the cleaning bucket and pulled out the item. It wasn't the metal itself. It was the specific, heavy, dark blue lanyard, faded but distinctive, to which the award was clipped. Thorne held the lanyard, letting the water drip onto the floor. Sergeant Brennan, witnessing this casual interaction between a SEAL commander and the help, stammered, "Sir, she's got her personal effects in the cleaning supply. I apologize, I'll have her." Thorne's head snapped up, his eyes the color of cold slate fixed on Brennan. "Quiet, Sergeant," Thorne commanded, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that required no volume to convey absolute menace. He turned his attention back to Volkov. He didn't ask her name or rank. He didn't need to. He knew exactly what he was holding. He shifted the lanyard slightly, revealing the heavy, star-shaped insignia of the Medal of Valor. It was understated, designed for field wear rather than parade formality, but unmistakable. Thorne rose slowly to his full height. He looked at the Cabo in the dirty utility uniform, then at the sergeant in the immaculate fatigues. "Cabo Volkov," Thorne said, pronouncing her rank with the reverence Brennan had denied her. His voice was now firm, resonating with a metallic clarity. "Let me read your record for the sergeant here, since he appears to have misplaced his glasses and his common courtesy." He didn't need the physical citation. The men and women of Thorne's community memorized the extraordinary actions of others. It was their sacred text. "Cabo Volkov, specialist, formerly attached to FOB Chapman Security Detail, 2018. Thorne began, speaking slowly, deliberately, forcing Brennan and the stunned clerks to listen. Citation reads, in part, "For acts of uncommon valor displayed during sustained engagement on 14 November 2018 in the Chark Valley, Afghanistan, Volkov, having successfully neutralized 2 heavy weapon positions at extreme range, a distance exceeding the expected operational limits of her weapon system, sustained a severe concussive injury from secondary mortar impact." Thorne paused, looking directly at Volkov. "Traumatic brain injury, 3 Purple Hearts," he added, his voice gaining edge. Despite incapacitating pain, extreme sensory disorientation, and the failure of her primary weapon system, Volkov immediately shifted her operational role. She abandoned her cover and utilized her secondary rifle, the HK-416, to lay down concentrated, suppressive fire for 18 minutes while completely exposed, drawing enemy attention from critical casualty extraction zones. Brennan was pale, the blood draining from his face, his rigid posture melting into a subtle, horrified slouch. The supply clerks looked between Volkov and the commander, their mouths slightly agape. Volkov's sustained action, Thorne continued, now loud enough to echo slightly in the corridor, under conditions of profound trauma and overwhelming enemy fire, directly resulted in the successful evacuation and preservation of 4 critical personnel who otherwise would have been lost. Thorne held the Medal of Valor lanyard high enough for everyone to see the insignia, letting the bronze star catch the harsh fluorescent light. "The Medal of Valor," Thorne concluded, his voice dropping slightly, "is awarded for distinguishing oneself conspicuously by gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty." He looked at Brennan, his gaze a physical weight. "Sergeant Brennan here," Thorne stated, not as a question,
But as a judgment, refused this soldier basic cleaning supplies and referred to her as the help. He advised her that her job was trivial and demanded she use elbow grease instead of requesting the tools needed for her duty. Brennan tried to speak. "Sir, I didn't know who she was. I was just following procedure." "Procedure," Thorne scoffed, a flicker of pure disgust crossing his face. "Procedure doesn't earn 4 lives. Blood does." Thorn then reached slowly behind his back. He released the sling catch on his HK-416, the same rifle Volkov had used to save those lives. It was an expensive, personalized weapon, custom Cerakote finish, fitted with specialized optics and a laser aiming module, a tool of Thorn's trade, his life extension. He unhooked the rifle, holding it out buttstock first towards Cabo Volkov. The movement was slow, deliberate, taking place in the sudden, absolute silence of the supply room. The physical weight of the weapon was suddenly massive, heavier than the Barrett, heavier than the mop, because of what it represented. Cabo, Thorn said, his voice soft, an intimate command reserved for warriors. Take this. Volkov, still processing the shock of her past being exposed, hesitated for only a fraction of a second. She placed the mop handle gently against the counter and extended her hands, palms up. Thorn settled the weight of the HK-416 into her grasp. The cold, familiar steel felt instantaneously right in Volkov's hands. The balance was perfect, her fingers naturally wrapped around the ergonomic pistol grip, the muscle memory of her combat years flooding back. She held the rifle loosely, effortlessly, the way a true professional holds their instrument. Sergeant Brennan watched the exchange. He saw the commander, the epitome of elite service, handing his literal life support, his weapon, to the janitor he had just insulted. It was the highest form of respect, a silent acknowledgement that she was, and always would be, one of the elite few. The rifle exchange was the full, final destruction of Brennan's arrogance. He stared at the Cabo, now standing straight, momentarily transformed, holding the formidable black rifle, and realized the immense cosmic mistake he had made. He had spit on history. He had mocked a hero. Thorn stepped closer to Brennan, his shadow falling over the trembling sergeant. Sergeant, Thorn stated, low and final. You deal with hardware. She deals with courage. When you understand the difference between those two things, you can reapply for your position. Until then, I suggest you take personal leave and reflect on the cost of the uniforms you so carefully starch. Thorn didn't wait for a reply. He simply turned back to Volkov, who held the HK-416 with the quiet dignity of a queen holding a scepter. When you're done with the floors, Cabo, Thorn said, a ghost of a genuine smile touching the corner of his mouth. I'll have someone detail the general's office to your specifications. You won't be needing the requisition form or the elbow grease. He gestured for the clerks to continue their work, if they could manage to move. Then Thorn walked out of the supply depot, leaving the silence, the weight of the rifle, and the absolute moral wreckage of Sergeant Brennan behind him. Volkov stood there, just for a moment, the cold weight of the HK-416 a tangible reassurance of her own true value. She looked down at the rifle, then back at the mop, and a quiet sense of peace settled over her. The general's boots could wait. The floor could wait. The paperwork was irrelevant. She was seen. She was honored. She carefully, gently, handed the HK-416 back to the supply clerk closest to her, a silent command that the weapon be returned immediately and safely to the commander. She picked up her mop. This time, as she pushed the heavy, wet head down the sterile corridor, she didn't feel the ache of the TBI or the weight of the trauma. She felt the quiet confidence of a warrior who knew her place was earned by something far greater than rank or title. It was earned by blood. If you believe respect is earned by blood and not by rank, type respect in the comments.